I'm Nate, and this is part 2 of the Grapple add-on to our existing loader bucket. We've got a couple things left to do on this. Most of all, we've got a lot of finish welding to do now that it's all tacked together. We need to do a little bit of paint. We need to get our hydraulic lines hooked up and make sure we come up with the correct way to interface to the tractor. And then we need to put this thing to work. Let's get going before this thing drops on my head. That's the plan today at Tucko Acres Farm.
So I decided to weld this grapple on with my Lincoln Tombstone welder for all of the critical weld joints where deep weld penetration is required. For welding rod, I use a 7018 1/8 inch Hobart welding rod, and I was running anywhere between 150 and 175 amps. For all the weld joints that I didn't expect to see a lot of stress on, I used my Hobart 140 MIG welder. Going back and forth between the two welders helps prevent my MIG welder from getting in a state where it trips its thermal breaker inside the welder. I did have that happen a couple of times, which is pretty common when I'm welding bigger projects. Having the stick welder running helps to try to minimize that. So one area where I felt like I had a miss in the design process is where the grapple welds are the top bar of the bucket. So if you remember back to the original build, there was a round tube that was bent on the top of the bucket. I cut that off to replace it with a 2-inch quarter wall square tube to give a robust mounting point to the grapple pivots. However, this only ties in the bucket on the ends, which is 1/8 inch steel, and then horizontally across the top of the bucket. I was concerned the force of the grapple closing had the potential to be too much stress on the joint. So I took a section of 1/2 inch plate and I cut 2 gussets out of it. I'm welding those into the upper corners of the bucket where the 2-inch square tube welds on the side of the bucket. Gives me a very strong connection between the gussets and the square tube, and also a large area to weld the gussets onto the bucket itself. This is an attempt to better distribute the load that we expect to see on the top pivot mount.
We've got our hydraulic lines ready to go on. So our bucket is welded and painted, and now we're going to hook up our hydraulics. 2 things I want to point out about what we're doing on this hydraulic system. To mount the lines in the center, I went with a bulkhead fitting. If you're not familiar with these, the way they work is you drill a hole in a piece of steel. This goes through the nut backs on the back, and this will give you a mounting point for your hydraulic line. So your lines will come on the ends here, but this you can kind of bolt through a piece of bar stock or plate steel just to give yourself some mechanical retention. And then where the hydraulic lines mount onto the tractor, previously when we did the post puller build, we used these like plastic with a metal top and bottom weld on clamps. And for where the lines just need to be routed on the tractor, there's not a lot of force pulling or pushing on them, those work great. But for the very end where we have our hydraulic couplers, I feel like that interface to structurally is a little bit weak, and so we're going to be replacing it with this bulkhead style fitting. So it's a 3/8 NPT female on both ends of this. You drill a 1-inch hole, you bolt this through the center, and then that gives you a rigid mounting point for our quick connect onto our tractor. So we'll be upgrading the tractor, I guess, in this process, but yeah, stay tuned, let's get to work.
So the grapple add-on is done, and it's time to put it to work. So we've got some old fencing that's already piled up on some portions of the farm, and then we've also got some old fencing that is yet to be pulled out. Normally, I'd use that post puller I built to pull fence posts out of the ground, but I just want to see what this thing will do. So I'm going to try to pull some old posts out of the ground, see if that works,
if it doesn't, I'll put the post puller on and use that. But the goal today is going to be get a full dump truck load of old fencing put together, so we can take that all to the dump tomorrow morning. So let's get to work and see how this thing performs.
I'm really happy with the way this grapple was able to gather old fencing, and also the amount of force that it was able to grab the brush with. The hydraulic cylinders on each end of the grapple produce about 4,000 pounds of force, for a combined 8,000 pounds of force. However, this amount of force is not what the grapple is exerting onto the material. The distance from the hydraulic cylinder mount to the pivot pin is about 4 inches. The tip of the grapple claw is about 30 inches from the pivot pin. This results in a 7.5 to 1 mechanical advantage in favor of the claw segment. This results in a force of just over 1,000 pounds to the material being clenched. For what I'm moving around, this should be more than adequate. Certainly, it's low enough force that I'm not worried about it bending teeth or bending the grapple, which is a good thing to consider in your design. You want to build something that is adequate, but you don't want to build something that has so much force that it inherently breaks itself under normal operation, like clamping onto something too hard, which I know sounds ridiculous, but I do think it's something you should consider.
So this is going to do it for the grapple video. I think it really did perform the way I expected it to. As far as picking up bundles of old fencing, it was fantastic. It worked great for that. As far as moving brush, it was great for that. I mean, it did a good job pulling out smaller bits of brush, and then for the really large, pieces of brush, it was great at, cutting them off at the base with a chainsaw and then coming and grabbing the whole stack. Our farm has got a lot of autumn olive on it, and so we've been slowly trying to remove that stuff. It's an invasive species that's just seems to really explode on the edges of fields. So where there's an interface between a wooded lot and a field, that stuff really seems to thrive, which is, in a lot of cases, that's where my fences are. So I like to not just cut it off, but pull it out altogether, so that the fence that comes in behind it, I don't have to try to compete with that stuff. If you are able to pull it out by the root, that seems to really do the trick as far as keeping it gone permanently. So anyways, let's do one final walk around of this grapple in case there's anything that I missed. I'll try to touch on and give you one final look at how this thing's constructed. All right, so you can see the pin mechanism, or how the pivot takes place. So there's a bottom mount there, top mount, and then a top mount for the cylinder and a pivot. So just 3 points that are rotating. All of those have a grease circ on them. Did get a couple shots of grease in there. I used to have just a single chain hook on this. I went ahead and made it a double just to give myself some extra flexibility. And then hydraulic lines, obviously both the top cylinders are coupled together, and the bottom of each cylinders are coupled together, running back into the quick connect. So I really like this change out I did for the quick coupler. That is a way more robust setup than what I had before. There were a couple times where I may have pulled on these lines a little bit harder than I wanted to, just with the orientation on the bucket, and that was pretty stout. So pretty happy with that. I think that was a good change overall. I think these style mounts that I put in originally worked great in a case where they're not going to have any load on them. But in this orientation where you have the potential to, you know, push and pull on the lines a little bit where they connect, those bulkhead fittings worked out quite well. And then let's take a look at these teeth. You know, I moved a lot of metal fencing, a lot of brush, and I even scooped a bunch of manure for my wife. We just put in some raised beds. So those 3 raised beds on the end there's 5 of them total, but the 3 raised beds on the end there, we built those this weekend, and filled the bottom of them with like old, you know, rotting, decaying logs and wood chips, and then put our compost, you know, composted stuff that's been sitting in our pile for a couple years, put that on top, which is pretty much just black dirt at this point. But anyways, we use the grapple to move all that stuff, and having this grapple on here to get a big bite or a big scoop of manure or wood chips really makes quite a difference. So if nothing else, just moving material, that worked out real well. I didn't get any video of that, but guess you'll just have to take my word for it. Worked out pretty good. But as far as robustness, I mean, none of these teeth are bent. You know, I was a little bit rough on it a couple times, thinking, you know, let's not break this thing the first time out. But you know, still wanted to run it through the paces. All the teeth are nice and straight still. You know, everything worked out real good. So do me a favor. This is content that you're enjoying, or just the build aspect of this and the kind of educational nature of it. If it's something that, you know, you want to stay in tune with, please do subscribe, and please do like these videos. Really helps out our channel. You know, it doesn't cost you anything, and we'll keep working through the process of making, you know, doing new projects and making more videos. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.